Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome to today's webinar, Unveiling the 2024 Sponsored Products Benchmarks, a Roadmap to Retail Media Success. I'm Hannah Yu, and I'm a Senior Editor at AdExchanger. Thank you so much for joining us today for this webinar. Before we kick things off, we have a few housekeeping items. If you have any questions, please type them into the Q&A tab. If you have technical concerns, put them in the chat tab and someone from our production team will address them. And if you'd like to use the Retail Media Benchmarks hashtag to share or find insights about this presentation on LinkedIn, you can do so. And it's now my pleasure to introduce our presenters. Andreas Reifen is the founder and CEO of Crealytics, a retail media supply-side platform for sponsored products and display. He was born and raised in Germany, but today he's living in New York City, as he has since 2016. And you could say that both he and Crealytics are successful German ad tech exports. Crealytics works with more than 60 large e-commerce brands, including Foot Locker and Urban Outfitters, among many others. And it has more than 200 employees around the world, including in New York, Berlin, London, and Mumbai. And one of those employees is Mark Burton. Mark Burton is the head of product and retail media at Crealytics. He provides direction and strategy for all the company's retail media technology solutions. He has over 6 years of experience in retail media, and he brings extensive expertise in product development, data analytics, and retail media strategy to his leadership position at Crealytics. And today, Andreas and Mark will be taking you through the 2024 Sponsored Products Benchmarks report. They'll dive deep into brand data across retail media networks. They'll have insights to share about topics like who is advertising with whom, the dominance of key players like Amazon and Walmart, seasonal trends, ad inventory distribution, and the strategic use of different kinds of sponsored products across product categories. So without further ado, let me turn it over to our experts. Andreas and Mark, please take it away.
Hannah, thanks a lot for the introduction and welcome everyone. I'm excited to spend the next 40 minutes with you. Would like to give you 3 reasons why you should stay the full time. It's going to be all about sponsored products today, which accounts for about 70% of the overall retail media market. We are first going to take a look at how Amazon grew this ad business by successfully copying Google's playbook. Second, we're going to reveal in detail what 9 leading retail media networks actually do with sponsored products, how they leverage them. And third, we're going to take a look at which brands are leading the game when it comes to sponsored products. So let's get right into it. What you see here is Amazon's US market share. On the left-hand side, you see their share in e-commerce retail, which is a staggering 38%. But what is surprising, if you take a look at the right-hand side of this slide, their share in retail media is 75%. And they overall make a $34 billion in the US only, while all the others together just account for a mere 25% of the market. So something isn't right here, means the Amazon rivals are apparently not getting a fair slice of the retail media pie. And if we basically extrapolate or apply Amazon's efficiency on the other players that are eligible for retail media, we see that they are leaving a $40 billion ad revenue on the table. That's the amount of money they could have brought in by being as efficient as Amazon in the retail media advertising game. So how is it possible that Amazon is so dominant? That's the question. So if we dissect the Amazon ad revenues, we will realize that a 75% come from on-site sponsored products. So if something is wrong, well, it's obvious where this huge gap between Amazon's efficiency and all the others that lag behind, where this gap is actually coming from. So how is it possible that Amazon is making a $26 billion with sponsored products in the US only? And well, they didn't invent this playbook. They simply copied it from Google. And what you see here is Google's journey from 2003, when they started with ads, until today, 2024. So at the very beginning, Google had no ads at all. And at some point, they copied this model from formerly Overture and started showing a few text ads on the right side rail. So a good 80–90% of their search engine result page, or SERP, what it's called, was organic, and only a fraction was paid. As Google figured out how to make ads as relevant as organic content, they started expanding the ad space. So they started pulling text ads to the top of the SERP. And they realized, well, people actually like this. And now they started making ads even more relevant than organic listings by pulling the so-called PLAs into the SERP, which never existed for organic. So now the vast majority of the result page was already paid. And if you do a search today, you will realize that above the fold, 100% of Google's content is paid. So whether you like this or not, let's take a look at what happened in the course of the last 10 years. And well, you see on the chart on the right side of this slide that Google made round about 10x the amount of clicks over time. So they expanded their inventory at a pace and increased the supply of paid clicks at a pace that demand actually could not keep up with. So the cost per click decreased drastically by almost 60%. But it didn't matter, because this sheer volume effect of having more paid clicks available by far overcompensated the CPC effect. And Google could grow the ad revenues in the course of the last 10 years by 344%. So what is interesting here is that you do not grow an ad business by making the cost per click more expensive. You grow an ad business by making ads relevant, by expanding the inventory, making clicks cheaper and cheaper, increasing the ROI, and this way attracting more and more budgets. So relevancy and ad inventory finally determine the success of sponsored products. And this is why we wanted to look behind the scenes and analyze in detail what the top 9 retail media networks are actually doing. And with this, I'd like to hand over to Mark, who will present all the details of our findings.
Thanks, Andreas. And we've quite clearly seen there how the leaders in tech, like Google, scaled sponsored ads, and then how Amazon followed suit. And now we'll look at the current state of play in retail media. And so while retail media is still emerging in some ways, sponsored products is one of, if not the leading revenue source for many retailers, including Amazon. And today we'll present the findings of our research into sponsored products across major US retail media networks. A quick note on the scope of this research. So here we're looking at 9 major US retail media networks, and our research focuses on desktop search, sponsored search. Our dataset covers a representative set of over 2,500 keywords within the categories of grocery, beauty, fashion, electronics, office, and furniture / home improvement. And in terms of the ad units covered by the research, we've collated data on all of the unit types used by our retailers, all the major ones, from in-grid sponsored products through to product carousels, sponsored brand carousels, and sponsored video ads. So let's take a look at some insights, starting with a straightforward question of how many ads are retailers showing in sponsored products in retail media? There are two things to consider here. Number one is how many pages actually show sponsored products, i.e., if I search on a retailer and I see organic products, do I also see sponsored products at all? So we'll call this coverage as we go through the slides, and you can see it represented here in the chart on the left. And number two, how many ads are then actually displayed per page load, which we see on the right. What we immediately see from this data is that Amazon and Walmart stand out from the rest in coverage. Almost every time we search for something on those retailers, we see sponsored products. The other 7 retailers in our set here range between around 40 to 70% coverage. So even before we get to how many ads are shown, these retailers are showing significantly fewer ads just by not showing ads on every page load. And not only are Amazon and Walmart covering more searches, they're generally showing more ads on the search pages too, as you can see on the right. Amazon, on average, fill around 11 in-grid ads per page, which is admittedly a lot of ads to put in the grid, and Walmart fill around 8 on average in-grid. The other 7 retailers in our set are typically filling between 2 and 5 in-grid slots per page load. Now, while 11 is a lot of ads, the point here is that Amazon and Walmart feel able to show a large number of ads in grid without breaking the customer experience. And what this suggests, going back to Andreas's points, is a high level of ad relevancy that's going into the decision-making process to unlock that inventory for these retailers. So we can also see below how vital in-grid is to sponsored search. In terms of the ad units themselves, all 9 of our retailers use in-grid sponsored products. Many of them also show a sponsored carousel at the top or bottom of the page. While again, Amazon and Walmart stand out a little bit by using brand carousels and sponsored video ads, which give advertisers slightly more choice and they're slightly more upper funnel tactics. They've been around on the Amazon side for quite a while. They're somewhat newer on the Walmart side, but they start to go away from just having a lower funnel execution into having some of that branding activation through videos and really a brand buyout type of carousel. So we can see even from this overview that Amazon and Walmart, perhaps unsurprisingly, lead the way in sponsored products. But this isn't just that they have more scale or a marketplace of brands. Those do affect things, but these retailers are also making sure that every page load is maximized, that every search returns sponsored products, and that the search result grid is strongly populated with sponsored ads. Going back to Andreas's point from the first section, Amazon and Walmart have really been able to maximize inventory and supply, and this likely links to relevancy too. You'll notice throughout today's session that Walmart and Amazon follow quite similar tracks. Walmart in some ways is very adept at following Amazon's lead in the same way that Amazon followed Google's playbook initially. So you'll see some fairly common trends coming from the two of them here. Let's now dig a little bit into placement strategy. So where are our retailers putting sponsored products on their pages, and what can we learn about relevancy on the way? In our research, we looked at where retailers are placing sponsored ads on the page. On the left-hand chart, you can see the breakdown of ad frequency by position. So you see that Walmart, Amazon, and also Best Buy have a top-of-page carousel to show sponsored products. Sometimes that's a brand carousel, and sometimes that's a straightforward product carousel. What we found interesting was that 4 of our retailers are also placing sponsored carousels, often with up to 10 or 20 products in them, right at the very bottom of the page below all of the search results. And what's most interesting about those ad units is what happens when you compare the ad coverage with and without those units. On the right-hand side of this slide, you can see that while Amazon's ad coverage is almost 100% regardless of the ad location, those who use bottom of the page ads typically do not see as strong coverage when you exclude those ads. So put another way, that means that retailers will show ads at the bottom of the page even when they're not willing to show ads in grid or at the top of the page. Let's look at an example of that in a bit more detail to make it clearer. So on this page, we're seeing on the right-hand side a search for apples on Walmart. The first visual at the top is the top of the in-grid search results. And you can see that all of the products are sponsored, so the top 4 in-grid slots, and all of them have pretty high relevance to what a consumer might be looking for if they were searching for apples. The second visual at the bottom shows the sponsored product carousel from the bottom of the same page, which are all sponsored, but they're more about visibility here than relevancy. These aren't apples exactly, but they're more Apple-related products. And when we look at just the grocery category from Walmart, we see that 99% of searches result in sponsored product ads. If we remove the bottom carousel, that goes down to only, I say only, it's still a leading figure among all the retailers, but only 83% of ads. So we start to see here a glimpse of how retailers use different ad units for different purposes. So in-grid needs to have a really high degree of relevancy, but those bottom of the page ads seem to be used at the moment for perhaps more cross-selling or more visibility purposes right now. So our short takeaways for this section. In-grid ads appear to have the highest relevancy threshold. These often line up very closely with the customer experience, and we'll see more of this as we go through the deck as well. But the separated units can be used for other purposes, especially at the bottom of the page, where we see that they are being used for more kind of visibility. The pros and cons to all of those approaches, but we found it really interesting that retailers are using those units in different ways. So let's round off our retailer section here by thinking about technology and how retailers make ad decisions. So when we think about sponsored products in general, we often think of ads which are painted onto the page in fixed positions. This is typically as a result of the ad and organic decision-making process, in which the ads supplied by the vendor are completely separate from the decision-making made by the retailer's backend, their search system, or their own internal systems. This can result in those experiences being a little bit disconnected and separated from each other, and hence why we tend to see them in fixed positions. But we do now see some evidence of retailers moving to a more flexible and dynamic approach to placing ads. On this slide, we see a frequency count for each of our retailers of where in our research we saw in-grid sponsored products. When these boxes are filled in blue, we've seen sponsored products there. When they are grey and unfilled, we've never seen sponsored products in those positions. And when they are dark, we very often or always see ads in those positions. What we can see here is that retailers are taking very different approaches across the board, even in something as universal as in-grid sponsored products. And what we can take from this slide is that there are a group of retailers who seem to be dynamically placing ads for each page load, i.e. they are not always putting ads in the same slots, but changing this depending on some internal decision making. Amazon, for example, make almost every slot in grid available for sponsorship, except for a few slots which never have sponsored ads towards the top of the listings. And the rest of our retailers appear to always put their ads into the same positions on the grid. And this is very much the classic setup in sponsored products. In some ways, it's easier because ad positioning is more predictable, but especially when there are a low number of fixed positions in the grid, can sometimes indicate that the ad and organic decision-making is quite separated and that there might be a struggle to open up more relevancy and more inventory in this key space. Walmart here is a slightly special case because all of their top grid positions are sponsored, which is highly unusual. So Walmart have spoken before about using relevancy decisioning in their in-grid ad placements. And as we've already seen from our Apple's example, they only appear to place sponsored ads in grid if a certain relevancy threshold is achieved. It's also enlightening thinking about this chart. The retailers with flexible ad placement, plus Walmart, are also the same retailers who had the highest ad coverage when we think back to our first section of the charts here. And coming back to the topic of inventory and relevancy, it's more likely that retailers who can place ads dynamically are using some kind of relevancy criteria in their placement decisions. And because they can place ads anywhere on the grids and keep relevancy front of mind, it's more likely that these retailers will be better placed to open up more inventory in the future. On a separate but related note, we also looked here at how well retailers cover searches as they get more complex. So on this chart, what we're looking at is the ad coverage by the number of words in the search query. So in our query set, we have short queries and we have longer queries. And we see that retailers differ quite significantly in their ability to handle more complex search queries. Again, this comes down to being able to show as much inventory as possible. So if you can serve sponsored products against a search query which has 4 words as easily as you can against 1, then you can serve more ads and serve more inventory. There is a big advantage to being able to handle every search term and show ads against it, of course. And although manual keyword targeting has been historically popular, it does mean that more complex searches may not result in ads, even if the same products show up organically. And once again, we can see our big leaders in Walmart and Amazon, and I'm saying Walmart and Amazon a lot in this presentation so far, but they have a very, very consistent ability to show sponsored products whether or not the search is 1 word or 4 words or any kind of complexity. We also see that Home Depot and Target are pretty strong here as well. And it can indicate that the retailer is using, as we mentioned, more relevancy-based placement or some kind of targeting automation, but basically being able to transcend that reliance on manual keywords and keyword targeting in general. For some of the other retailers, we do see quite a significant drop-off as the search query gets more complicated. And again, all of this adds up to lost opportunities or less inventory being available to show. The real leaders are able to show more and potentially more relevant inventory versus the others, and it will only increase that gap between them. So to sum up this section, in-grid is universal and important among our retailer set here, but how ads are actually placed in the grids varies a lot. And we see evidence of retailers starting to move beyond the classic keyword targeting and fixed positions. And the real leaders are starting to use other criteria to decide where to show ads dynamically on their pages. We also see a disparity in how retailers handle more complex searches, with the leaders able to show ads against all searches and some retailers struggling with more complex search. Thinking back to Andreas's point in the introduction, we know that retailers who can increase inventory through dynamic placements and show ads with a high relevance have a very strong advantage in sponsored products. And incidentally, this is something that Crealytics technology can help retailers of any size and maturity achieve quite quickly. We'll touch a little bit more on that at the end. So we spent some time looking at retailers so far in our a run through here, but of course there's no retail media without advertisers. So let's now look at some insight into categories and advertisers from the research. From our research categories, we see that FMCG categories look the strongest. Perhaps unsurprisingly, given the prevalence of FMCG brands in retail media in general, grocery was comfortably the most competitive. So 3/4 of searches in grocery return sponsored products across the board. We know that much of the innovation in retail media also happens within grocery and with FMCG brands. So that's a result that could be expected. Likewise, beauty was the second most competitive, as many FMCG brands also play in the beauty space. But there's clearly opportunity for other categories to increase the coverage and competitiveness, I guess, of the sponsored products going on there. There's a fair drop off down to furniture, which only has about 50% coverage of sponsored products. Even within grocery, though, we do still see a big discrepancy in coverage at the subcategory level, with massive competition in snacks and less coverage in fresh categories. Perhaps this reflects the brand versus private label balance in those categories. We also saw over time that competition and coverage was clearly quite seasonal. Here on the left, we can see the overall sponsored search coverage throughout the research period, with a significant ramp up between Black Friday and Christmas, and then a drop off into the new year. We noted too how particular subcategories became more competitive during that festive season, and the heavy emphasis on gifting categories like fragrance. I think what that swing indicates is that retail media is still maturing in some ways. We would expect some seasonal variation, but such significant swings, you've got 10 percentage point swings in coverage across the space of a month, suggests that retail media is not yet an always on marketing channel for all brands. Certainly when we look at brands, we'll see that it is the case for some, but we know that there's still significant headroom here for brands. We also were able to look at some seasonal event insights here as well. And there's a notable example in the skincare area of beauty. So many of you might have seen the CeraVe TV ad with Michael Cera that aired during this year's Super Bowl. Perhaps unsurprisingly, again, in the week following Super Bowl, CeraVe were also the most visible skincare brand that we could see in the research. And we saw CeraVe sponsored products much more in both absolute and relative terms. Interestingly, we also saw Clinique dip quite heavily in market share following the Super Bowl as CeraVe and other skincare brands that are not shown here became more visible. So that's a bit more of a kind of fun example, but we thought this was a nice example of a branding campaign tying in with sponsored products for a full funnel approach. So it's actually quite a good example of marketing across the piece, right? When you have that buzz and then you can capitalize on it with your lower funnel type advertising too. So to sum up this section then, we do see significant seasonality still within sponsored products and within categories. And we're seeing how brands are utilizing sponsored products to tie into wider events and marketing. We also see that grocery is the most competitive category in sponsored products right now. And then as a final section here, let's take a closer look at brands themselves, starting with which retailers are capturing spend from most brands. It's definitely a recurring theme of this presentation, but Amazon and Walmart again lead the way in capturing the long tail of brands at present. These numbers will certainly be somewhat affected by marketplace brands, although we did exclude some marketplace brands from the research. But as we'll see shortly, they are both gaining spend from the very biggest brands in beauty and grocery, the examples we'll look at. But this carries through to all of the categories that we saw in our research. We also see Target doing particularly well with beauty brands on the right-hand chart there. And what's interesting, I think, about Target, Walmart, and Amazon here is that they've all invested really heavily in offering their advertisers multiple ways into their platforms. So they're often able to connect multiple demand sources. They often have self and managed service options for their advertisers. And I think that's reflected in the kind of volumes of brands that these retailers are actually working with. As for the brands themselves, well, there are a few leaders on the retailer side. There are also definitely leaders on the brand side. So here we see an example of the most commonly seen brands from our research, starting with beauty. What's quite apparent here is the presence of L'Oreal brands actually right towards the top. So in the italic bold text, if you can make that out on your screens, you'll see L'Oreal brands, and 4 of the top 6 in beauty are owned by L'Oreal. Notice as well from the last slide how Amazon, Target, and especially Walmart are often capturing advertising from those very, very top brands as well as the long tail. So it's not just that, say, Walmart are capturing a marketplace of brands here. They're getting the fair share or more than their fair share of investment from the biggest brands in each category as well. So they're really doing a good job across the board in many ways. Equally, similar trends in grocery here. So we see that most of the leading brands are actually advertising with all 5 of the grocery offering retailers in our retailer set here. Actually, Ben's Original being the most visible brand during our research period. There's one more really interesting insight on this slide, and you'll notice that some of the bars only have one color, so we're only seeing brands which advertise with one retailer. But if you look closely at who those brands are, you'll see that Kroger is one of the biggest advertisers on Kroger. And then on Amazon, there's 365 by Whole Foods and Amazon themselves. And what we noticed during the research was that there's a couple of these retailers, Amazon and Kroger, who are actually using sponsored or featured ad slots to promote private label products. This is an example of how retailers are thinking beyond just retail media into how sponsored products can actually work for their entire business and to be able to promote those perhaps higher margin own label products as well as generating ad revenue. So here's an example from Amazon, where we see, I think, a Whole Foods or a Amazon nut product being advertised in the first sponsored slot, which would usually be a sponsored product slot. Equally on Kroger as well, we can see them featuring some of their own frozen fish lines in the featured product slot against anything else. So we thought that was an interesting insight about how there are some retailers who are kind of connecting up retail media more with their wider business. And that is an opportunity we expect to see retailers perhaps using more of in the future as we have more use cases for sponsored products. It's not just retail media, but there can be benefits to the wider business and being able to give more visibility to key products in general as well. So it's interesting that some of our retailers are advanced enough to be able to do that right now. And it's probably not isolated examples, there may be more of them, but Kroger and Amazon really stood out from our research there. So to our final set of section takeaways today, we see that L'Oreal is as dominant as in beauty on the brand side as Amazon is on the retail side. We also see how Amazon and Walmart are quite far ahead of the pack in attracting advertisers, both big and small, and how the retailers who offer multiple paths into their advertising stack, like Target, as well as Amazon and Walmart, tend to get more advertisers interacting with them. And finally, we see how retailers like Kroger are joining retail and media together by promoting private label in sponsored ad slots. So that brings us to the end of our slightly whistle-stop tour of insights in sponsored products for today. Hopefully you've seen some useful insights from the research we've presented today, and thanks very much for listening along. If I can sum up a major takeaway here, perhaps, I think that people sometimes assume that sponsored products is already maxed out and mature, that there isn't room for growth within sponsored products. But I also think that the findings from this research show that even among some of the biggest networks, there are significant opportunities to increase relevance, increase inventory, and attract more advertisers, going right back to the start of what we looked at today. Most retailers won't achieve the scale of Amazon and Walmart in their retail media, but everyone can learn from the leaders. And every retailer can and should be focusing on those two pillars of inventory and relevancy to optimize for success in retail media, just like Amazon and Walmart did, and just like Google did before them. Something which can help retailers maximize both inventory and relevancy easily and quickly is the Crealytics Retail Media SSP, and you can find out more about that piece of technology on our website and by contacting us, as you can see on the screen here. But once again, thank you very much for your time today. On behalf of myself, Andreas, and we'll pass back to Hannah, I guess, for a bit of Q&A. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Mark and Andreas, for those insights. And this will now turn to our first question is, how do you suggest selling more ads to e-commerce brands when they're perhaps opposed or reluctant to do so?
This is a very common issue. There's usually, if you work in retail media, you not only have to satisfy your CFO and bring the money in, you also have to make sure that your brand partners are happy, but also you're kind of always fighting the other side of the business, those on the e-commerce side that think your ads are intrusive. So specifically, to your question, or to the question asked here, I think you have to provide evidence that your sponsored products add value. In the end, there is one currency in retail. We have two revenue streams. One is traditional retail, where you have a thin margin, and the second one comes through ads. And if your ads are so intrusive that people don't click on them, they no longer find what they are looking for, and they also don't convert, you do more harm than good. So the relevance factor here plays a crucial role. And what we see in our data is that sponsored products need to be as relevant as the organic product. Otherwise, it's a very dangerous game to play. So in the end, you have to provide evidence that basically the margin per page load is bigger when you show sponsored products compared to a situation where you would not show sponsored products. And then incentives are aligned, and then you probably win over those folks from the e-commerce side.
And you were speaking about the importance of relevance. How do you measure something like relevance, how relevant an ad is?
So the easiest KPI to measure relevance is certainly the click-through rate. It's the ratio of people who see a product and also click on the product. Products that are not relevant, people don't want to click on. There's a second KPI that also matters. You can imagine if people don't want to click on something, but a few people still do so, the likelihood that such a product converts into an actual sale is quite low. So bad sponsored products have a much lower click-through rate, but also a lower conversion rate. And with those two KPIs, it's pretty easy to determine relevance.
We have another question about relevance. Do you think the issue is that RMNs, retail media networks, don't offer enough relevance, or brands not seeing RMNs as a worthwhile way to spend for search?
I think there's a huge issue in the industry with lack of relevance. The numbers we are seeing are that sponsored products, in most cases we've seen, are much lower when it comes to CTR, and it's as far as only 40% the CTR of organic products. And this means, well, so where is this coming from? It oftentimes is a multitude of different influence factors. So first, if you don't sell enough, if you don't have enough brands participating, you might just not have relevant sponsored products. So you show what you can, and if somebody is searching for, I don't know, a nasal spray, and then you show some cookies, of course, people don't want to click on this, and it also won't convert. The second thing then is you might have brands that cherry pick and they bid on only a few products. They have a whole catalog of 5,000 products, but they cherry pick 5. Again, it limits the amount of products that are actually eligible to show on a result page. But then the most important factor is you have a piece of technology, and if that's designed for an advertising case, it will show that crappy stuff, but it shouldn't, because it should be a holistic optimization. The decisioning should be, well, should I take one tile organic product away and paste my sponsored product in? Will this yield better results? And a technology that is siloed and only focuses on ad money will just fall short and at all likelihood kill more money than it will bring in.
Yeah, just as an aside, I will say that if you were looking for a nasal spray, maybe you would want something to snack on, but maybe it wouldn't be cookies. Because you're talking about the user experience, the customer experience, are there tactics? How can you add more of these sponsored placements without negatively affecting that shopper experience?
Mark, do you want to take this question?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, Amazon have certainly cracked this in a way. People might disagree with that, but you know, like it's a lot of ads to have on a page, as I said during the presentation. But they're still one of the most kind of loved brands of all in some ways. I think for adding more slots, what you need to do is have that relevancy factor that means that actually these products are relevant to the customer. We would be confident to show them on our own, even if they potentially weren't sponsored or they were lower down the grid. It's a good way to actually guarantee that the customer experience is good, is to have that relevancy kind of backdrop almost. However, what I would also say is that testing is super important within this. So wherever possible, retailers need to be looking to understand, as Andreas was saying in a previous answer, the overall impact of having sponsored ads and not having sponsored ads, and when you increase kind of ads per page, what that does to that overall balance of ad margin and natural margin. So having a clear testing plan around that doesn't have to be something that goes on for months and months and months, but having a clear set of KPIs that you can get around as a business, as a retailer, is really important when you're trying to understand the success, I guess, in general of your inventory. And sometimes that's what I think from experience holds back retailers from adding more inventory, is that there isn't necessarily a clear KPI or a clear test plan that sits between the e-commerce teams perhaps and the retail media teams on, you know, where are we going to agree that this is working or not, aside from any technology concerns, of course.
Is there a recommended length for how long you should be testing? Maybe it shouldn't be, you know, a year or many, many months, but what's a reasonable time span?
Always depends on the scale, right? So if you've got if there are retailers who are willing to, you know, sacrifice 5% of their ad inventory for 2 weeks, they'd probably get to a pretty quick result on what was happening. But I think it's reasonable to have an always-on small-scale testing approach where you can change it up every few weeks and understand if there are really significant differences. If you don't see significant differences as you add more inventory in the, say, organic margin on the page, that's a sign that you're probably not harming your customer experience too much. So if you see kind of an increase in revenue and you can test on a shorter time span, I think that's a reasonable thing for retailers to do. Would you add anything to that, Andreas?
No, I think that's all spot
on. And in your opinion, maybe for both of you, what's preventing the large majority of from adopting flexible sponsored placements within the grid?
I think it's a political issue in the first place. Like there's constantly a fight between the two sides of the business, and that's not any kind of like discussion that makes sense where you come to a conclusion. It's a power struggle, I would say. There's no KPI that rules in the end. I indicated already, there's a simple formula. As a business in retail today, you have to make money, and margin equals money. And now you can show sponsored products or you can leave them out. You need to figure out what brings in more money. And if done right, and you show lots of sponsored products, you will make more money. Others have shown this, Walmart, Amazon. So you have to basically stop this political discussion and have a KPI that helps you make a decision.
We have a question too about personalization. How is that considered when you show an ad? Are there logistics or they're behind the sponsored projects to determine which product is shown when to which client?
Yeah, so I don't know about all solutions in the market. I can refer to what we do, and Mark, you can add something to this. In our case, it's really on the individual user level. So if somebody searches from a location that is close to some warehouse and a retailer can ship faster to that location, this person would see a different set of ads than somebody with the same search in a different location. So all those factors, including product margins and return rates, are factored into this. You see something similar going on Amazon. There are personalization lists, and you see, or recommendation lists, better said, and you see there's a mouse over question mark. If you hover over, it will tell you those ads are based on star rankings and what advertisers want to pay. So you can see this is some blend of this former like pure recommendation that now gets some impact from sponsored products. And that's in essence what we are seeing, that those things are merging. But you can't have a highly personalized experience on the organic side and then a big break, and then you show low-key crappy ads. This might bring some ad dollars, but it doesn't help the business to grow.
This question is about brands and retailers working together. How do brand and retailer joint business plans influence RMN spend and seasonality?
Yeah, hey, John, saw you posted that question. Good to have you on the webinar. I can't answer this on the seasonality side as much as just in general. What you're indicating, it's like, I mean, we can ask the question a slightly different way. To what extent is this a media play versus a relationship game? And retail media is a strange animal, because in the end, it's not just a media rationale where brands see an ROI and invest accordingly. It's somehow something in between. You have to navigate the complex relationships. You want to sell through a certain retailer or platform, so they are asking you for money. And in the end, with those joint business plans, that's like a mutual commitment. You spend so much on the advertising side. This is those are the products we are going to buy. So it's all kind of intertwined and much more complex by nature than when brands buy ads from Google or Facebook. Specifically to the question, there's a huge impact. We just see this with one of our partners where this joint business plan has not been signed and everything stalled. So there's just nothing going on, which indicates that everyone is waiting for this big agreement to then basically execute against this. So there is a strong impact.
You know, one of the highlights of the presentation for me was when you were talking about CeraVe, because I did think that was one of the funniest Super Bowl ads, the "My passion is human skin." And we have a question about a different category. What have you learned about sponsored products platforms in the furniture and home goods space? So something like Bed Bath & Beyond or a Wayfair. Where do you see the future of sponsored products in that category?
So specifically Wayfair, I know their platform. I know those people who have built the platform. It was it was an acquisition, sort of acqui-hire from Wayfair, and they then started building their own tech. So I'm quite familiar with what they do. I think Bed Bath & Beyond is or was on third-party tech, but it merged now with Overstock. I think it's Beyond now, so it seems to be on proprietary tech as far as I can tell, but I'm not familiar with what they do specifically. I don't know whether this is a question between furniture and the rest. I think it's rather how will retailers run this? Will this be a third-party tech stack, or do some decide to build tech in-house? And this will always be like the market will find some balance. We will, we have seen a few that move to full stack in-house, building it all in-house. For the majority in this current retail media market, given the fact that there's better technology now available than a few years ago, I do not expect that this will be the standard model, that everyone will hire 50 engineers and maintain a highly complex tech stack. I think there will be a separation between supply side and demand side with SSPs and DSPs in a more democratized space, which will happen in furniture and also other verticals. But I don't think it's there's specific tech that is just applicable for furniture versus the rest. Happy to add something.
Yeah, just to add on, I think on the category in general, I think we also plan to, we've got research across all of those categories, which I think don't have time to go through in this webinar, unfortunately, but we'll be looking through a little in the future. One thing that strikes me about something like the furniture category, and I think this applies to fashion as well, is what we're seeing with things like Wayfair have an AI assistant, right, for curation. Zalando here in Germany have one in the fashion space where actually they're really reinventing their customer interface. And it's still early days, but it's not bad. Where actually you can look for a style or you can look for a particular look. And in kind of those categories where inspiration is more important, I think actually that ability to link up the ads and the organic is going to become even more important, because it's going to be very, very jarring if you've got some beautiful AI-driven results that are giving some organic products to the customer, and then something completely unrelated is coming in from a decision set from the advertising side. So I would say that from what we could see in the data, that although furniture and those kind of categories didn't have as much coverage today, I think there's almost as much need for that technical link up in those categories going into the future, because you have that more inspiration driven need from the customer in the first place.
Can you expand on the benefits of advertising owned products together with sponsored products or ads? How would you find the sweet spot, the right mix, and what role can an RMN play in that?
It boils down again to the margin question. So what's the underlying rationale here? You can sell third-party brands and get, ad money in to increase your margin. Or you can sell private label brands, which by themselves have already a much higher margin. And it's a optimization problem in the end. Does it make sense to basically refuse to take that ad money, to put your own ads in there and sell more of your private label brands that again will drive a lot of margin? And it seemed for quite some time that you had to decide, do you do the one thing or the other? And it seems, we know some Amazon brands are investing heavily in, investing, they're not really, it's play money they get within Amazon, but it's an investment because Amazon is not taking the other advertisers' money. You see over time that Amazon deprioritized private label brands. There were hundreds of them, and nobody is talking about those private labels any longer. So they got deprioritized, but it seems that they focused their private label efforts just on a few private labels that they are then driving or selling more aggressively. And I don't have the magic formula, but I think I outlined the dynamics and what this optimization problem looks like.
We have just one final question. Do you have any data on display ads?
It's one for me, I guess. No, not yet, but it's something that we are looking to add into to our research for the next round. So yeah, we know that on-site display is a growth area, especially, and we do see that those ad units get used quite a bit. We focused on sponsored products for this time round, but for a next time, it's likely that we'll add display into this as well.
Well, that's all the time that we have for questions. That was very lively. Thank you so much to Andreas and Mark. We'll be sending out an on-demand recording of the webinar to all attendees this afternoon, and Crealytics will also be sharing the slides of the presentation via email, and they're going to add this video to their website as well if you'd like to check it out there. Thank you to everyone in the audience as well for joining us. Until next time, goodbye, everyone.
Thank you so much for your time. Thanks for attending. Bye, everyone.